Here we go with Chapter 4, The Law of Violence. A row of distant figures stood shoveling salt into barrels, filling them and then working together to lift them up to rest beside each other on a narrow track. Later, a cart would be pulled along that path and the heavy barrels of salt would be raised by teams of workers and stacked onto it. But for now, they were doing the back-breaking work of hacking through the crust and lifting layer after layer of white salt into the barrels. After digging down into a depth of about 3 feet, the salt turned yellow and was still damp with the estuary mud. This they left. Erik was studying the process intently. The haze of salt dust that rose around the workers looked unpleasant. On a hot day, it would be choking. He could imagine the dryness of the atmosphere, all moisture absorbed by the salt, eyes half closed against the stinging dust, pores clogged with salt, skin worn to an ancient leathery texture. Everyone could recognize a lifelong salt worker by the roughness of their skin. But more dangerous still was the work of those who were out on the dikes. Up to their waists in tidal water, they were letting the sea gush into the great rectangular floodplains that had been marked out by the dikes. Then, when the tide was at its height and on the turn, they had to fill the breach hurriedly, piling stone and mud to seal the water in, so that the sun could evaporate the trapped sea to leave yellowing piles of salt for the shovelers. 2 or 3 dike workers a year died in the struggle with mud and tide. "Erik?" Her voice was tentative. "Innie." He turned around, but was glad that she had found him. "Can I join you?" This time he glanced up and smiled. "Of course." "Bjorn says you have a female character, and that she has gained a Bezant already." "Yes, it's amazing. I've never experienced anything like it. I really think that I have connected to the game in a way people usually miss out on. It's made me wonder what more is possible." "That's wonderful, Erik. You might have time to get somewhere before, you know." They sat close together. A few strands of Ingeborg's long blonde hair were lifted by the breeze to touch Erik gently on his cheek. "The salt pans are bad news, Innie. Look." "I know, but at least you would live close to us still." "Even that is still an unlikely allocation. I should put in a request, I guess, but I still hope. I hope that I can find a way to make a challenge myself, or maybe that my dad finally comes out of hiding and is successful." "Erik, can I ask you something personal?" Ingeborg looked serious. He was so used to seeing her in a playful, tomboyish humour that Erik was slightly shocked by a sudden insight into the adult woman she would become. Thoughtful, intelligent, and he had to admit, beautiful. "Yes, ask." "Why doesn't your dad play Epic?" she quickly added. "You don't have to say if it's a secret." "Oh." His gaze shifted uncomfortably from hers back to the workers in the estuary. "I wish I knew. I wish they trusted me, but whatever the secret is, they keep it even from me." He was embarrassed to admit it. Suddenly, Erik felt tearful. "You know I can be trusted, Innie, don't you?" Instinctively, he rubbed his tongue across the rough bottom edge of one of his front teeth. "Of course. Every time you smile, I know you can be trusted." Erik grinned then, and they cast their minds back 7 years. The September olive harvest was a rare opportunity for fun for the children of the village. The adults would lay down netting around the small trees, and then stand back and let the children run wild. They would shake the branches or hit them with sticks, or even climb into the thickets to rock the tree until the ground was strewn with olives and debris. The olives were then gathered in the nets and poured through a bucket and moving platform device to sort out the twigs and leaves from the black and green leaves. Erik rode on the shoulders of Big Erik, or B.E. as they called him, grabbing tree branches and shaking them until all the olives were down. "That one done?" asked B.E. "Aye, finished. Quick then, there's Ingeborg." B.E. was a bold scoundrel nearly twice Erik's age, and Erik loved to be involved in his games. "Yes, hurry, hurry!" Erik drummed his feet onto B.E.'s chest as they galloped to the next tree. Ingeborg, holding hands with her chubby brother Bjorn, ran up just behind them. "Ours!" Erik was gleeful. "But there's not many left," complained Bjorn. True. You can help us with this." B.E. loosened one of his hands from the grip on Erik's legs to gesture at the tree. For a few minutes they were silent, busy pulling tree branches back and forth. Then, with some difficulty because of Erik's weight on his shoulders, B.E. bent low and moved the two of them stealthily up behind the girl who was crouching back towards them in order to reach the lower branches. Erik giggled, knowing it was bold, and vigorously thrashed the branches above her head. B.E. could barely keep his balance as Olives rained down on Ingeborg. "Oh!" She ran out, hands over her head. "Did you do that deliberately?" Ingeborg challenged them, little hands on hips, her fair hair a tangle of twigs and leaves. "Of course not," replied B.E. innocently. "You know the rules." Ingeborg eyed them suspiciously. "Ja, and I also know you two." Bjorn came over. "Are we finished?" "That was the last one," answered B.E. "Then let's go get a drink." "Wait, carry me." Ingeborg always gave as good as she got, which is why it was good to tease her. She pulled her brother down so she could get on his shoulders. "Now you two troublemakers," she hailed them imperiously. "Let's play Epic." "Oh, Epic!" shouted Erik. "How?" B.E. was puzzled. "We are knights, and the first one to fall over loses," explained Ingeborg. "Is that allowed?" asked Bjorn. "Probably not," replied B.E., hoisting Erik up more firmly and gripping him tightly. "Well, I don't know." Bjorn was uncertain. Erik felt the excitement in his mount and knew from the tension of the frame beneath him that B.E. was ready to move. "Charge! Charge!" Erik yelled at the top of his voice, before being abruptly cut off, as B.E. jumped towards Bjorn. He recovered his position, only to have Ingeborg grab him by the shoulder and pull hard. Erik was on the ground, B.E. beside him, laughing. "What was that cracking sound?" Bjorn leant over Erik. "Oh no, poor little Erik!" "What?" B.E. sat up immediately on hearing the deep dismay in Bjorn's voice. "Look!" Bjorn pointed down. "Oh!" B.E. looked sadly into Erik's face. "Does it hurt?" "What?" replied Erik. "Your tooth." Let me see, let me see!" Ingeborg pushed the two big children away and leant over. She was serious for a moment, then tried to hide a smile. "You look daft." "Are you all right, little Erik?" asked B.E. again. "Yeah, I'm fine." "Let's look at it. Maybe it can be stuck on." Ingeborg dropped to her knees and began parting the grass. "I don't think they can," said Bjorn slowly. "Remember Greta? She had to have the whole tooth removed when she broke hers." "Oh, don't worry," Ingeborg spoke as if she was an adult and not just 7. "Little Erik is young. He'll grow a new one." Erik was happy that Ingeborg was so cheerful. He would have been very distressed if he had only Bjorn and B.E. to look at. They were exchanging glum looks as they helped search for the piece of broken tooth. The children were visibly disheartened by the time Harold and Rolfsson approached them. Bjorn explained what had happened. "Oh, son," Rolfsson said faintly, as though he had been struck. He shook his head and looked to his neighbour. "What do you think? Was it a violation?" Harold shrugged. "First things first. Are you well, Erik?" "I'm fine, Dad. It doesn't hurt. A bit." Harold crouched in front of his tiny son and pushed Erik's lip to one side with his thumb. Stared for a while at the broken tooth. It might function all right, but you're going to have a crooked smile for a long time." "There is no way of capping it?" asked Rolfsson. "Maybe in Micklegard." There was a long pause. "What about the violation? Can we say it was an accident that occurred while shaking for olives?" Rolfsson was pale and stuttered. "We could." Howard gave a severe glance at the children. He scowled at Ingeborg. "You do understand that people never, ever fight or hurt each other?" The little girl gave a violent nod. "Our ancestors left their home planet centuries ago because of violence, and for all we know, that planet was destroyed by war, as we have been on our own ever since. Those first settlers brought with them one rule, a rule we have obeyed ever since. There is never any reason for violence." The children had heard this lecture 100 times, but suddenly it sounded far more important than ever before. "We weren't fighting, sir," interjected B.E. "We were just playing Epic." "Epic? How?" asked Rolfsson. "We were being knights," replied B.E. Harold gave a wry grimace. "The whole point of the game is to provide an alternative to fighting, not to cause it." He squatted so that he was eye level with Ingeborg. "Now, children, can you all keep a secret?" They nodded earnestly as his gaze moved from one to the other, assessing them. What you did might be considered fighting, and if that's so, Bjorn is old enough to get into a lot of trouble. A judge could even exile him, taking into consideration that Erik was hurt. I'm not hurt, Dad. Listen, if you are asked, you must say Erik broke his tooth getting olives, understand? They all nodded again, impressed by the seriousness in Harold's voice. Let's hope for the best, Harold sighed and glanced at Rolfson. Do you have to tell Freya? Rolfson asked him, still sounding anxious. Yes, I tell her everything, but don't worry, neither of us will say anything more on the matter. Rolfson nodded several times, trying to reassure himself. Later, as a treat, Erik was riding Laban the donkey as it walked around and around, forcing the press down on the olives, their juice running thick and lumpy into clay pots. His dad led the donkey by the halter. Of everybody involved, you are the one who is most likely to forget our secret, Harold looked solemn. Why, Dad? Because everyone else will soon no longer need to talk about it, but you will have that broken tooth and people will always ask. Don't worry, I won't tell. Good boy. You understand why it is important. Not really. We were only playing. I know. That's why I'm not cross with Bjorn or Big Erik, but it's the judges. They can be very, very strict about fighting. You know the only rule of our society. Yeth, never harm anyone. They might think Bjorn harmed you deliberately. Erik laughed. It wasn't him. It was Ingeborg. I'm not blaming anyone, and don't you either. When you're older, you will feel bitter about your looks. No. Anyway, Erik said, giving his dad a broken smile. I broke it jumping for olives. Harold smiled back with the same proud expression he had worn when Erik had unclipped after his first epic session. See you tomorrow for Chapter 5.